Welcome to The Deep Dive, where we plunge into complex topics to separate fact from fiction and leave you truly informed. Today, we're tackling a claim that has, well, truly ignited debates, definitely fueled a lot of social media narratives, and frankly, caused a lot of concern across the internet. The big question: is BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, truly behind the U.S. housing crisis? It's a question that brings up so many anxieties, about these powerful, kind of opaque entities operating behind the scenes. Our mission today is to cut through all that noise. We're going to use the sources you provided to really uncover the factual role of BlackRock and its powerful software, Aladdin, in the housing market. And then we're going to expand that discussion. We'll take a broader look at how powerful tech and financial entities interact with society, particularly with those who are often, well, disenfranchised. Our goal is to equip you, our listener, with accurate information, clarify some pretty major misconceptions, and ultimately offer a more nuanced understanding of these incredibly complex systems. You're going to walk away from this deep dive with the ability to distinguish fact from fiction, hopefully, and a deeper perspective on how immense wealth and cutting-edge technology truly shape our world. Okay, let's unpack this. Is BlackRock truly buying up all the houses and driving up prices?
Yeah, that's definitely perception that has gained significant traction, hasn't it? Especially online. And it's an understandable fear, really, given the sheer size and influence of BlackRock. I mean, they're huge. But as we delve into the source material we have here, you'll start to see the reality is far more intricate. And the direct role attributed to BlackRock in the housing market is often deeply misunderstood. The nuance here is absolutely key, and it's something we're going to spend a lot of time breaking down today.
Right. And to even begin to understand BlackRock's real role, or maybe lack thereof, we first need to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful, yet often sort of invisible pieces of financial technology in the world. I'm talking about BlackRock's proprietary software, Aladdin. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel or maybe a Disney movie, right? Aladdin. But in the financial world, it truly functions as a kind of master key.
It really does. Though Aladdin isn't some mystical genie, unfortunately, but it's certainly far more than just a simple computer program. Its full name is actually an acronym, and it's quite telling: Asset, Liability, and Debt and Derivative Investment Network. At its core, Aladdin is this incredibly comprehensive portfolio management software. It was developed by BlackRock Solutions, which is the risk management division of BlackRock, Inc. You can think of it as the central nervous system, maybe, or perhaps the brain of modern finance for its users. It provides this holistic view of financial risk across just incredibly diverse assets.
Okay, so it's not just for BlackRock's own use then. Is this a tool they actually license out to other big institutions?
Precisely. That's a key part of its business model now. Its core function is to integrate risk analytics, portfolio management, trading execution, and operational tools all into one single unified platform. This allows for real-time management of investments across incredibly vast asset pools. And what's truly fascinating about Aladdin is that it doesn't just crunch numbers from stock prices. It processes an immense breadth of data. We're talking about global economic data, sure, stock market prices, obviously, but also seemingly abstract factors, things like government policy changes in distant countries, the stability of a political regime, or even localized weather conditions that might impact, say, agricultural commodities or shipping routes.
Hold on, weather conditions, that feels like a really granular detail. How does something like that actually factor into managing a portfolio on this massive scale?
Well, those granular details allow for incredibly sophisticated risk management and sort of foresight. For example, think about extreme weather events like a prolonged drought in a major agricultural region or severe flooding along a critical shipping artery. Those things could directly impact supply chains, commodity prices, even the financial health of companies invested in those areas, right? So Aladdin would factor that information into a portfolio's overall risk profile, calculating potential losses or maybe even opportunities. It enables its clients to run incredibly complex simulations, like Monte Carlo simulations. These essentially run thousands, maybe even millions of what-if scenarios to predict how a portfolio might perform under various extreme market conditions. Think a global pandemic or a sudden, sharp interest rate hike. This level of comprehensive analysis supports highly informed decision-making for its clients. It moves beyond just looking at simple historical performance to predictive risk assessment.
That's truly remarkable. So where did this financial superpower, this predictive engine, actually come from? What's its origin story?
Well, Aladdin's origin story dates back quite a way, actually, to 1988. It was initially created just for BlackRock's internal use to manage their own investment portfolios and mitigate their own risks. Makes sense. However, its evolution really dramatically accelerated after the 2008 global financial crisis. That crisis, as many of us probably remember all too well, underscored a critical, urgent need for robust, transparent risk management capabilities across the entire financial sector. Before 2008, many institutions were operating with these fragmented systems. They often couldn't get a clear, consolidated view of their total exposure to various risks. So when the subprime mortgage market collapsed, followed by Lehman Brothers, institutions suddenly found themselves holding vast amounts of illiquid or toxic assets. But they often didn't have a clear picture of their true value or the interconnected risks involved. It was chaos. Aladdin's comprehensive and, importantly, transparent approach to risk assessment suddenly became incredibly attractive, almost indispensable, really. That led BlackRock to begin offering it to external clients. The crisis highlighted that robust integrated risk management wasn't just a luxury for large institutions anymore. It was an absolute necessity for survival and stability in an increasingly interconnected global market.
All right, here's where it gets really interesting then. We're talking about a system that started as an internal tool but became so vital it was offered externally after a global crisis essentially forced the issue. Can you give us a sense of the sheer scale of Aladdin's influence today? Because the numbers I've seen are just staggering.
They are truly astonishing. As of 2020, an estimated $21.6 trillion in assets were being managed or monitored by Aladdin for its clients. Now, to put that into perspective for you, our listener, that's roughly equivalent to 10% of all global stocks and bonds combined. Just pause and think about that for a moment. One single software platform, indirectly influencing the management of 1/10 of the world's total financial market value in equities and fixed income. It truly illustrates its dominance and, frankly, its systemic importance in the global financial ecosystem.
Yeah.
You can't overstate it.
10%. 10% of global stocks and bonds. That is just mind-boggling. And it's not just BlackRock using it, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned external clients. What kind of clients are we talking about here? Who trusts Aladdin with such vast sums of money?
No, absolutely not just BlackRock. That's key. Aladdin serves over 1,000 organizations worldwide now, comprising a really diverse client base of major institutional investors. We're talking about massive entities like CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System. They manage around $260 billion in pension assets for millions of public employees. Huge responsibility. Or think of Deutsche Bank, a major global bank, using it for managing its $900 billion in assets. And Prudential, the global insurance giant, leveraging it for their $700 billion portfolio. And beyond these specific huge examples, its clientele includes a wide range of other asset managers, large commercial banks, insurance companies, and pension funds all around the world. They're all looking for that comprehensive risk oversight and efficient portfolio management across their diverse holdings. Aladdin provides that single pane of glass, essentially.
And what's the actual engine powering all of this analysis and oversight? Is it just one giant supercomputer hidden away somewhere?
Not quite a single supercomputer in a hidden bunker, no. It's more like a vast, globally distributed and interconnected infrastructure. Aladdin operates on a network of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 high-performance computers. That number might even be higher now. It has these strategically located state-of-the-art data centers. For example, there's a significant one in Wenatchee, Washington. That location was chosen partly for its access to affordable hydroelectric power and its robust infrastructure, interestingly enough. These data centers are absolutely crucial for enabling it to handle these massive and incredibly diverse portfolios in real time. And it manages all asset classes, from standard stocks and bonds to complex derivatives, private equity, and yes, even real estate-related assets. It provides what they market as a truly whole portfolio view. This robust technological backbone is what allows it to provide pretty much instantaneous insights and scale to meet the complex and ever-changing needs of global financial institutions. It ensures continuous monitoring and analysis around the clock, globally.
Okay, it's clear Aladdin is a powerhouse then. It offers unparalleled risk management and insights. But its strategic role seems to extend beyond just managing BlackRock's internal business or its private institutional clients. It actually played a crucial, almost hidden role, didn't it, in stabilizing things after the 2008 financial crisis on a national level.
It did, absolutely. And this is a less known but really significant aspect of Aladdin's influence in history. Following the 2008 crisis, the U.S. Treasury Department actually leveraged Aladdin to analyze and manage a substantial chunk of toxic assets, around $130 billion worth. These were those highly complex, often illiquid securities, like the mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations that were held by struggling financial institutions like Bear Stearns and AIG, which the government effectively took over. The sheer complexity and, frankly, the opacity of these assets made it incredibly difficult for the government to understand their true value or figure out how to dispose of them without causing even more market instability. Aladdin provided the analytical framework and the transparent risk assessment needed to dissect these incredibly complicated portfolios. This was a critical behind-the-scenes effort, really, to prevent a total collapse of the financial system and try to restore some confidence.
Wow. So it was essentially used to figure out what those toxic assets were even worth, assess their inherent risk, and then help the government determine how to handle them. That's an extraordinary level of trust placed in a private firm's software, isn't it?
It really is. And its capabilities were also employed to value vast pools of mortgage-backed securities for the government-sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They faced immense exposure to the housing market collapse, as you'll recall. Furthermore, Aladdin played a key role in managing a massive $1.25 trillion in repurchasing operations for the Federal Reserve. So this demonstrates Aladdin's crucial, albeit often unseen, role in stabilizing the broader financial markets during periods of extreme volatility. It truly became a foundational tool for government agencies trying to navigate the complexities of the crisis, underpinning critical decisions that affected the entire U.S. economy and, really, the global economy, too.
And it sounds like BlackRock isn't just resting on its laurels with Aladdin, even after achieving this level of integration and influence. Are they continuously investing in and evolving this platform to stay at the forefront? It seems like they'd have to.
Oh, absolutely. BlackRock maintains a strong commitment to continuous innovation and development for Aladdin. It's core to their strategy. For example, back in 2019, they acquired a company called eFront, which was a leading provider of alternative investment management software. This acquisition was specifically aimed at integrating private market data, things like private equity, venture capital, private debt directly into the Aladdin platform. The goal is to provide clients with what they call that whole portfolio view, meaning a truly comprehensive look at both their public and private assets, all on a single platform. That's the holy grail for many big investors. Beyond acquisitions like that, BlackRock is consistently incorporating cutting-edge technologies. Think artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms. They're weaving those into Aladdin's capabilities. This enhances its predictive analytics and its risk modeling even further. They're also integrating ESG, environmental, social, and governance data. This allows clients to assess the sustainability and ethical impact of their investments alongside the traditional financial metrics. Huge trend. All of this ensures Aladdin remains relevant and sophisticated enough to manage trillions across increasingly complex, diversified, and yes, ethically conscious global portfolios. It's really a never-ending process of refinement and expansion for them.
That's incredible. I mean, we're talking about a system that manages such a vast amount of the world's wealth and plays such a deep, pervasive role in global finance, even government stabilization efforts. So, okay, let's bring it back. What does this all mean for our initial question about the housing crisis? If Aladdin is this powerful, is it somehow directly buying up all the houses and making them unaffordable?
Right, and that's a crucial distinction we absolutely need to make very clear for you, the listener. Aladdin, as we've established, is a sophisticated software platform. It's an analytical tool. It's code. It cannot, by its very nature, buy or own physical property. It doesn't sign deeds, Its purpose is to help BlackRock, the company, and its many clients make incredibly informed investment and risk management decisions. And to be even clearer, BlackRock, the company itself, also does not directly buy single-family homes for the purpose of converting them into rentals. That narrative, which is so widespread in some social media circles, just isn't accurate. They're not the direct purchasers of tens of thousands of homes you might see listed on Zillow or Redfin.
Ah, okay. So it's a tool that informs decisions, but isn't the decision maker or the buyer itself. That makes a lot more sense when you explain it that way. But if it's not BlackRock or it's software, Aladdin, where does this widespread belief, this really persistent narrative actually come from? Is there some confusion with another entity, perhaps, one that has been very active in the housing market?
You've absolutely hit on a key point there, and it's a very common and, frankly, understandable mix-up. A significant portion of the narrative surrounding BlackRock buying up homes definitely stems from widespread confusion with Blackstone. And it's really important to stress for you, the listener, that Blackstone is a completely separate private equity firm. They are distinct legal entities, completely different companies with separate leadership, separate investment strategies. They have no direct relation to BlackRock whatsoever, beyond both being major players in the financial sector. Their names are similar, yes, which obviously causes the confusion, but their actual real estate strategies, particularly in housing, have been quite different.
Okay, so let's talk about Blackstone's actual real estate actions then, because that sounds like it's almost certainly the primary source of much of this public confusion. What exactly did Blackstone do in the residential real estate market that might lead people to think it was BlackRock?
Right. Blackstone has indeed been very active in the residential real estate market over the years, and their actions align much more closely with that public perception of a large firm acquiring many, many homes. Back in 2012, this was right in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, remember. The housing market was still severely depressed, foreclosures were rampant everywhere. At that time, Blackstone founded a company called Invitation Homes. This new entity then proceeded to acquire tens of thousands of distressed single-family homes, often properties that were foreclosures or deeply discounted, needing work. They bought them with the explicit intention of converting them into rental properties. Their strategy was basically to professionalize the historically fragmented single-family rental market. By 2017, Invitation Homes owned over 48,000 homes, so a huge number. Now, Blackstone held a significant stake in Invitation Homes, but they later sold that stake for a substantial $7 billion in 2019. So they essentially exited the majority of their direct single-family rental ownership through that vehicle.
More recently, though, in 2021, Blackstone acquired another firm, Home Partners of America, for about $6 billion. That company focuses more on a rent-to-own model, offering tenants a potential path to home ownership. So you can clearly see why the public might conflate Blackstone and BlackRock, especially when both are these massive financial players engaging in large-scale, multi-billion-dollar transactions in the housing space. But again, it's crucial. These are distinct actions by a distinct firm, Blackstone, not BlackRock.
That clears up a huge part of the puzzle, definitely. So if BlackRock isn't directly buying up single-family homes to rent them out, what is their actual real estate involvement? Because as a huge asset manager, they must have some exposure to the real estate sector, right?
Sure.
Even if it's not through direct physical home purchases.
Well, they absolutely do, yes. But their approach is fundamentally different and much less direct than Blackstone's historical actions. One of their primary avenues is investing heavily in mortgage-backed securities, or MBS. You hear that term a lot. Now, these are not physical houses, they're financial instruments. Complex ones, often. Essentially, banks issue individual home loans to borrowers, and then these loans get packaged together, bundled into securities, and sold off to investors like BlackRock. By investing in MBS, BlackRock provides crucial liquidity to the mortgage market. This means they're buying the underlying debt, which in turn indirectly helps banks free up capital so they can lend more money to other home buyers. It's a vital part of the financial plumbing, if you will, that enables home loans to happen. But again, it's a financial asset investment, not a direct purchase or ownership of physical property. They're facilitating the flow of capital in the housing market, not acquiring the houses themselves.
Okay, so they're kind of like a giant bank for the banks in a way, helping keep the flow of money going for home loans, which in a way supports the broader housing market without them directly competing for the actual homes.
Exactly. It's a critical but definitely behind-the-scenes role in ensuring capital is available for mortgage lending across the country. Another area of BlackRock's involvement is in financing new housing developments. They've invested in programs specifically designed to finance purpose-built single-family rental communities. Now, this is an important distinction to make. These investments are directed towards new construction, so they're actually adding to the overall housing supply. These are homes built from the ground up specifically for rental. This helps to meet rental demand rather than removing existing homes from the for-sale market that individual buyers might be competing for. So in this sense, they are contributing to new housing stock, which is often a critical need in many areas, especially as demand for rental properties continues to grow.
And what about those claims, though, that BlackRock owns a significant percentage of rental homes across the country? Are those indirect stakes substantial enough to give them widespread control over the rental market?
Right, so BlackRock does hold indirect stakes in companies that manage rental homes, yes. But this is typically as part of their broader investment portfolios, like index funds or ETFs that track certain market sectors. For instance, they do have an investment in a major real estate investment trust, or REIT, called American Homes for Rent. It's a publicly traded company. As of recent reports, BlackRock holds about a 6.7% stake in that company, valued at roughly $872 million. Now, American Homes for Rent does manage a substantial number of rental homes, around 80,000 properties, according to recent reports. That makes them one of the largest institutional landlords. However, it's really crucial to understand that BlackRock's 6.7% stake is simply an investment in a separate, publicly traded entity that manages rentals. It is absolutely not direct ownership or management of these 80,000 homes by BlackRock itself. It's a very, very different scale and type of involvement than directly buying up properties one by one or owning a controlling stake in the company. It's more akin to you or I owning shares in Apple through a mutual fund. You don't own the iPhones themselves. You own a tiny piece of the company that makes them.
Got it. So even with those indirect stakes, what's the actual reality then of institutional investor scale and impact on the overall U.S. housing market? Are these big firms collectively truly dominating sales to the extent that they're the main ones driving up prices nationally?
Well, the data strongly suggests they are not. Not even close, really. According to detailed research from John Burns Research and Consulting, who are a leading real estate consulting firm, institutional investors, and they define that as firms owning 1,000 or more homes accounted for a tiny fraction of U.S. home purchases in the second quarter of 2023. We're talking about just 0.4% of all home purchases. Tiny. And this figure is actually down significantly from their peak activity, which was around 2.4% back in late 2021 when the market was hotter and rates were lower. Now, even if you broaden the definition and include all types of investors, not just the institutional giants, but also the much larger category of small mom-and-pop buyers, individual flippers, people buying second homes that collectively made up about 25% of sales in 2023. That's still far, far from the highly publicized and inaccurate figure of 44% that circulated in some claims. That 44% figure misrepresented the data badly by conflating all investors together and then somehow pinning it all on BlackRock alone. And BlackRock's direct role within this already small institutional slice is, as we've discussed, effectively negligible.
Okay. And are these institutional buyers the ones who are buying, generally outbidding typical families for the same move-in-ready homes in desirable competitive neighborhoods?
Generally speaking, no. That's not their typical strategy. These institutional investors typically target distressed properties, often foreclosures or homes in significant disrepair that require substantial capital improvements before they could be rented or sold. Or, as we mentioned, they invest in new construction built specifically for rental purposes from the outset. They are not usually directly competing head-to-head with individual home buyers for existing move-in-ready homes in the way the popular narrative suggests. Now, can they influence local markets? Yes, absolutely, especially if they concentrate their buying in specific regions or submarkets, like we saw with Invitation Homes in the Sun Belt post-2008. But their overall national market share is simply too small to be the primary or even a major driver of widespread price increases across the entire country. The numbers just don't support that conclusion.
So it really sounds like the picture is far more complex than a simple BlackRock is buying all the houses narrative suggests. It seems that's largely a misconception, fueled by confusion with Blackstone and maybe just a general anxiety about large financial players. If that's the case, then what are the real fundamental reasons behind the U.S. housing crisis? The rising prices, the lack of affordability that so many people are experiencing day to day.
Right. If we want to understand the bigger picture, the challenges in the U.S. housing market stem from much deeper, more systemic issues. These issues predate and, frankly, far outweigh the limited impact of institutional investors like BlackRock or even Blackstone. The core problem, the true elephant in the room here, is a chronic, deeply entrenched supply shortage. It's basic economics, really. We're talking about an estimated deficit of nearly 4 million homes across the United States today. That means there are roughly 4 million fewer housing units, apartments, houses, condos than needed to adequately meet current demand from households. This mismatch creates intense competition for every available property.
4 million homes short. That's just an astonishing number. How do we even get to such a massive structural shortage over time? It didn't happen overnight, surely.
No, definitely not. It's really the result of decades of historical underbuilding. It's been accumulating. Especially after the 2008 financial crash, new home construction significantly slowed down. Why? Well, there was a collapse in demand, obviously. Banks tightened lending standards dramatically for builders, and there was a general loss of confidence among developers and home builders. Many went out of business. This slowdown persisted for years, and construction never truly recovered to the levels needed to meet underlying population growth and household formation. We just haven't built enough housing for a long time. This created a persistent, accumulating deficit that has compounded over the last 15 years or so. And then, on top of that fundamental lack of building, you have significant regulatory and zoning hurdles at the local level, which make it even harder to build. Things like restrictive local zoning laws, particularly those that favor only single-family homes on large lots, or impose strict height restrictions, severely limit where and what type of new housing can be built, especially more affordable multi-unit dwellings like apartments or townhouses. And then there's the pervasive not in my backyard, or NIMBY, resistance to new construction. Community opposition, often citing legitimate concerns maybe about traffic, school overcrowding, or changing neighborhood character, but sometimes just resistance to change can delay or outright block new development. This is especially true in highly desirable areas in states like California.
It's just a classic case of demand far, far outstripping a severely constrained supply.
And on the demand side, what's been driving that? Because it's not just about a lack of supply, right? It's also about who wants to buy and why.
It's exactly. The demand side has been incredibly strong too. We've seen significant demographic shifts. Millennials, who are a very large generation, are now roughly between their late 20s and early 40s. They're entering their prime home buying years. This demographic wave alone creates a massive surge of new demand for housing, all hitting the market around the same time. Then you layer on the historically low mortgage rates we saw throughout the 2010s and especially in the early 2020s during the pandemic. Those super low rates fueled demand even further, making homeownership seem more accessible on a monthly payment basis, at least initially, and pushing prices upward as more buyers flooded the market. Beyond those big factors, you also have population shifts. More people have been moving from higher-cost coastal areas to growing metropolitan areas in the Sun Belt, for instance. This has created localized surges in demand at places like Austin, Phoenix, Boise cities, where developers simply haven't been able to keep pace, partly because of those existing supply constraints and regulatory barriers we talked about. These combined factors, demographics, low rates, population shifts, create immense upward pressure on prices when supply can't keep up.
So really a perfect storm. Chronic low supply meeting robust, maybe even supercharged demand. And then, more recently, interest rates started climbing significantly, didn't they? Making things even tougher for potential buyers.
Yes, exactly. And that's the latest major factor, really exacerbating the affordability crisis we see now. The Federal Reserve, in an effort to combat broader inflation across the economy, embarked on a series of aggressive interest rate hikes starting in early 2022. This has directly pushed mortgage rates significantly higher. They went from historical lows around 3–4% to often well above 6.5% or even 7% pretty quickly. Now, while these higher rates have somewhat cooled investor activity because the potential returns on buying and renting out properties aren't as attractive with higher borrowing costs, they've also made home buying significantly harder and less affordable for regular individual buyers. A 30-year fixed mortgage on a median-priced home today, even if the sticker price of the home itself hasn't changed much recently, can result in a monthly payment that's hundreds, maybe even over $1,000 higher than it would have been just 2 or 3 years ago. This directly worsens the affordability crisis, making it incredibly difficult for many people, especially first-time buyers, to even consider buying a home, regardless of who else is buying or not buying.
What about those criticisms of institutional landlords, though? The ones like Blackstone's Invitation Homes or American Homes for Rent. While they might not be driving national prices overall, do they have any impact on the rental market specifically, or the experience of tenants living in those homes?
They absolutely do, and it's a very important point to acknowledge. We shouldn't dismiss those concerns. While firms like Blackstone, through Invitation Homes historically, did convert homes into rentals, thereby technically adding to the rental supply, there are valid and significant criticisms about their practices as landlords. You've seen reports from outlets like Reuters, The Atlantic, and others highlighting concerns. These often include things like steep rent hikes year after year, the imposition of various, sometimes hidden or excessive, fees, think pet fees, convenience fees just for paying rent online, hefty late fees, application fees, and sometimes reports allege poor maintenance or slow response times to tenant issues and repair requests. These practices can certainly impact the quality of life and affordability for tenants in the specific areas where these firms have a concentrated presence, like certain submarkets in Florida, Arizona, Georgia, or North Carolina. However, it's still crucial to remember that their overall impact on national rent inflation is likely limited when compared to the fundamental systemic supply-demand imbalances we just discussed. They are a factor that can create very real localized issues and tenant frustrations, absolutely, but they're probably not the primary driver of the national housing or affordability crisis overall.
Okay, that makes sense. And we absolutely can't let this discussion go without directly addressing that incredibly widespread and persistent claim, the one that BlackRock owned 44% of homes in 2023. Where did that specific figure even come from, and why was it so prevalent? It seemed like it was absolutely everywhere on social media for a while.
Right. That claim is unequivocally inaccurate. It's just false. And it's a prime example of how pervasive misinformation can become online. It spread incredibly widely through social media channels, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and was unfortunately amplified by a few online articles, including one on Medium that got a lot of traction. The 44% figure most likely resulted from someone conflating all investors. Remember that 25% figure we mentioned, which includes individual mom-and-pop landlords, small local firms, short-term flippers, second home buyers, and then incorrectly attributing that entire already inflated share solely to BlackRock.
It's really a classic case of misinterpreting data, maybe misunderstanding percentages or market share, and then misattributing it to a convenient, large, and perhaps somewhat feared target like BlackRock.
And when you put BlackRock's actual real estate-related assets into the context of the entire U.S. housing market size, it really highlights how absurd that 44% claim actually is, doesn't it? The scale just doesn't add up at all.
Not even remotely, exactly. BlackRock's direct real estate equity assets, which were valued at approximately $60 billion back in 2020 through their various funds and investments. That number might be slightly different now, but still in that ballpark, are a tiny, tiny fraction of the vast U.S. housing market. The total value of the U.S. housing market is estimated to be somewhere around $36 trillion, maybe even more now. So BlackRock's holdings represent an almost negligible percentage, far, far less than even 1% of the total market value, probably closer to 0.1 or 0.2%. This fundamental misunderstanding of scale, combined with that persistent confusion between BlackRock and Blackstone, is what really fueled that particular piece of misinformation and allowed it to spread so rapidly and convincingly to some. The U.S. housing crisis is a deeply complex issue. It's driven by broad systemic supply constraints built up over decades, overwhelming demographic demand pressures, and the significant impact of fluctuating interest rates. It's not caused by a single firm like BlackRock secretly buying up all the homes.
Okay, so if the housing crisis isn't primarily about BlackRock buying homes, and that narrative is largely a misconception, then what is the bigger story here? What can we learn about how powerful entities like these giant financial firms or tech companies operate in our world? Our sources delve beyond just the housing numbers to illuminate something they refer to as billionaire instincts. What's that about? It sounds intriguing.
Yeah, this raises a really important question that sort of transcends just the housing market or the financial specifics we've been discussing. Our sources highlight a broader and sometimes unsettling critique of how certain billionaire instincts, patterns of behavior, or strategic thinking among the ultra-wealthy and powerful often lead these individuals and the entities they control to target the disenfranchised. And by disenfranchised, they mean populations who lack organized resistance, people who don't have significant voting power, who cannot fund political campaigns to push back, and who generally lack a strong public voice or the means for effective collective protest. The core guiding principle for these instincts, as one of our sources puts it quite starkly, is often to go where there is no organized resistance. Find the path of least resistance to achieve your goals.
So it's about finding the easiest path, essentially. The path of least resistance to achieve their own objectives, often at the expense of those who are least able to fight back or even make their objections heard.
Precisely. That's the argument being made. And in the era of technology oligarchs, where, as the source provocatively states, code is law and capital is God, this instinct potentially becomes even more potent and perhaps more dangerous. The ease with which technology can be leveraged, data analysis, automation, surveillance, to dispossess, disadvantage, or simply ignore those without formal power or representation is a significant concern raised in the material. It's about leveraging efficiency and scale in a way that can often overlook the human impact or the broader ethical considerations, simply because the targets, the people affected, have little or no effective recourse within the existing power structures.
Let's maybe delve into some of the fascinating case studies that the sources use to illustrate this billionaire instinct in action, moving beyond just the finance world for a moment. We could start with Elon Musk and his public criticisms of USI, the U.S. Agency for International Development. How does that fit into this framework of targeting the disenfranchised?
Right, the source discusses Elon Musk's public war, as it calls it, with USAID and the broader foreign aid establishment. The crucial insight offered here is why he might choose to target them specifically, according to this analysis. The recipients of USAID services, think refugees in crisis zones, impoverished rural communities in developing countries, marginalized populations struggling with food insecurity or disease. These groups have essentially no lobby or political voice within American politics. They are, quite literally, voiceless in the halls of power in Washington, D.C. They lack the mechanisms to defend themselves or effectively counter public critiques launched by influential figures within the U.S. political system.
So the argument being presented is that his criticisms aren't necessarily rooted in a genuine desire for reform that would actually benefit these vulnerable populations, but rather it's more of a calculated political move, choosing an easy target.
That's exactly the argument presented in the source material, yes. It suggests that Musk's political instincts, like those of many powerful figures perhaps, are finely tuned toward identifying leverage, not necessarily toward achieving justice or pursuing comprehensive systemic reform, which is often much harder. He understands, the argument goes, that defense contractors have powerful champions in Congress, constantly lobbying, donating to campaigns. They have organized resistance. Similarly, oil executives fund political campaigns and command significant political influence. They can push back effectively. But starving children in places like Sudan or displaced women in Haiti, they simply do not have that kind of political clout or representation in Washington. They can't fund a PAC. Now, while it's certainly true, as the source readily acknowledges, that the NGO industrial complex, the whole system of foreign aid delivery, has its flaws, sometimes enriching consultants more than the communities they're meant to serve, this isn't unique to foreign aid. Other bloated or inefficient sectors, like military spending or the infamous revolving door between Wall Street and the U.S. Treasury, often go largely unchallenged by these same powerful billionaires, precisely because they do have powerful, well-funded allies who would fight back fiercely. Therefore, attacking USA, from this perspective, is portrayed as potentially being political theater. It's a relatively low-cost, high-impact target for generating public relations buzz or political points, rather than a genuine difficult effort at systemic reform where powerful vested interests would inevitably push back hard.
That's a really stark contrast. So the targets chosen by these powerful entities can often reveal more about the underlying power dynamics and the strategic calculations involved than about the actual problems supposedly being addressed. Let's move to another intriguing and perhaps more chilling example from the sources. Peter Thiel, his company, Palantir, and the concept of deportation viewed as an exercise in efficiency.
Yes, this is presented as a particularly stark example of the billionaire instinct applying through the lens of technology and data. Palantir, the data analytics company co-founded by Peter Thiel, has developed sophisticated software that's used by various government agencies, including ICE, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement. The explicit aim of this software in this context is often framed as helping to optimize deportations, make the process faster, more targeted, more efficient. The source describes this approach as effectively reducing human beings, immigrants, asylum seekers, to mere logistical problems or abstract data points to be managed. In this kind of worldview, an undocumented immigrant, for instance, might not be viewed primarily as a person with a story, a family, aspirations, or fears, but simply as an anomaly to be corrected within the system, or a process to be streamlined for maximum efficiency. It's portrayed as a fundamentally dehumanizing approach to what are incredibly complex and deeply human situations. Their systems can analyze vast amounts of disparate data phone records, utility bills, social media, location data to identify, track, and ultimately process individuals for detention and deportation with, well, frightening efficiency.
And the source raises a really provocative question about this whole logic of efficiency, doesn't it? It asks if the government's purpose is truly to save lives and maximize societal well-being, and if efficiency is the ultimate goal. Why isn't Palantir's powerful technology deployed with the same vigor to prevent the 40,000-plus annual road deaths in the U.S., which seems like a much larger, more universally recognized problem?
Exactly. The source pointedly asks that question. Why? If efficiency and saving lives are the true goals, don't we apply the same level of technological rigor and relentless optimization to other areas that cause immense loss of life or significant societal harm, like traffic fatalities? It points out that it is technically possible today to monitor every speeding car on every road using existing surveillance infrastructure, automatically issue tickets via mail or even digital means, and perhaps even deduct fines directly from bank accounts in real time. Such a system, while maybe dystopian sounding, could almost certainly dramatically reduce road fatalities through sheer deterrence and enforcement. But we don't do that, do we?
No, we don't. And the reason given in the source material is quite revealing about power, influence, and crucially, who has a voice in our society.
It really is. The stark contrast, the source argues, lies in who would be affected. The car-owning middle and upper classes, a huge swath of the population, do vote consistently. They do complain loudly, organize, and use political channels when they feel inconvenienced, unfairly penalized, or subjected to what they perceive as overreaching surveillance. They do have effective representation in government through elected officials who rely on their votes. If that level of intense surveillance and automated enforcement were attempted on them for something as common as traffic violations, it would undoubtedly lead to widespread public outcry, lawsuits challenging its legality, and almost certainly lost elections for the politicians who supported it. The political cost would be enormous. But undocumented immigrants, lacking the power of the vote, lacking formal political representation, lacking the resources to mount effective legal challenges, become, in the words of the source, the perfect target. They have little to no organized resistance, no effective political voice. This makes them vulnerable to being reduced to mere data points for optimization by powerful technological systems, often without significant political consequence for those implementing or profiting from those systems. This really underscores that argument about how the billionaire instinct, as described here, often capitalizes on powerlessness and exploits the absence of a public voice or effective opposition.
This is truly fascinating, really connecting the dots between how powerful entities sometimes choose their targets and the underlying motivations, which seem often to be about leverage and minimizing resistance rather than necessarily about justice or the common good. So, flipping this around, what does fiction tell us about these often invisible populations and the potential consequences of ignoring them or treating them merely as data? It seems our source material brings in some interesting literary examples to help illuminate this human dimension.
Yes, fiction in this context is presented as serving as both a powerful warning and a kind of mirror. It helps us to grasp the human element, the emotions, the suffering, the resilience that cold data and abstract narratives about efficiency often completely obscure. It allows us as readers to imagine the humanity, the individual struggles, and the quiet resilience of those who are targeted by the efficiency of empire, as the source puts it, or simply overlooked by mainstream society. Fiction can give voice to the voiceless in a way that statistics or policy reports often cannot. It fosters empathy.
Tell us about the novels mentioned, Deported and Empty Country. How do they shed light on these complex ideas about visibility and disenfranchisement?
Well, in the novel Deported, we encounter the main character, Aurelian Sol. He's portrayed as stateless and voiceless, a profound symbol of the utterly disenfranchised individual in our modern system of nation-states. He is, as the source vividly describes him, bounced from country to country like contraband, a really poignant image that illustrates his complete lack of agency and the denial of his basic humanity in the eyes of bureaucratic systems. His invisibility, his utter lack of legal status or national belonging, makes him seem expendable, endlessly manipulable by forces beyond his control. But the narrative takes a powerful turn. Instead of simply vanishing or being crushed by the system, he ultimately manages to build a sanctuary, a sovereign hope built on empathy and resistance. This highlights a crucial idea presented in the analysis. The invisible, the marginalized, must often find ways to build their own visibility, their own community, their own forms of agency and resistance in a world that seeks to deny their very existence. It's portrayed as a testament to human resilience in the face of systemic dehumanization.
That sounds incredibly powerful. And then Empty Country sounds like a completely different, yet maybe equally poignant scenario, almost like a surreal thought experiment turned into a narrative.
Yes, it's presented as a surreal reversal that forces the reader, and by extension society, to confront a hidden, uncomfortable truth about dependence. In Empty Country, the premise is that the United States suddenly collapses, grinds to a halt, when all undocumented workers simultaneously leave or disappear. The consequences are immediate and catastrophic. The national infrastructure starts to crack, crops rot unpicked in the fields, essential services like childcare and elder care evaporate, restaurants close, cities slow to a crawl, because the foundational labor that kept everything running has simply vanished overnight. It's described as a haunting reminder, as the source phrases it, that the invisible hands running the machine are not disposable. They are, in fact, indispensable. It's a powerful fictional illustration of the indispensable, yet often unrecognized, undervalued, and sometimes actively denigrated contributions of these populations to our economy and our daily lives. Both novels, in their different ways, use narrative power to bring to life the profound human cost and the systemic vulnerabilities that are often hidden by abstract discussions of data, efficiency, economic statistics, or border control policies. They force us to see the individuals behind the numbers and the labels.
So fiction helps us feel and understand what raw data might just tell us in cold numbers, adding that absolutely critical layer of empathy. That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of trying to escape problems rather than solve them, the source material also critiques this idea of techno-elites potentially escaping to places like Mars. How does that connect back to this core idea of empathy and responsibility for the world we actually live in?
Right, the source uses the metaphor, or perhaps the literal ambition for some of a ride to Mars, as symbolizing the techno-elite's desire to escape the world they helped break rather than fix it. It's a very pointed and sharp critique, isn't it? It frames this kind of ambition, this intense focus on interplanetary escape among some prominent billionaires, not as forward-thinking vision, but rather as a form of abdication, an abdication of responsibility for the complex, messy, urgent problems right here on Earth. The provocative question it poses directly is, why solve inequality when you can leave the planet?
That's a really powerful challenge. It suggests that instead of focusing their immense resources and intellect on addressing fundamental problems here on Earth, problems that perhaps their own industries or actions might have even contributed to creating or exacerbating, some powerful figures are simply looking for a way out, literally looking for an escape hatch.
Exactly. It implies a fundamentally misplaced set of priorities, according to this critique, where immense resources, unparalleled ingenuity, and arguably some of the brightest minds on the planet are being directed towards building an escape pod for a select few, a literal flight from the consequences of our collective actions, rather than towards solving the complex, entrenched issues like climate change, poverty, inequality, and disease that affect billions of people here and now on this planet. It's presented as a profound call to reevaluate what true progress and genuine vision actually mean in the 21st century. It suggests that perhaps true innovation should be directed towards healing and improving the world we have, the only one we currently know can sustain us, not simply abandoning it for a high-tech fantasy elsewhere.
So instead of escaping or instead of optimizing dehumanization, as we saw with the Palantir example, what does the source material suggest are the alternative paths? What are these blueprints for reorganization for a more conscious and equitable future? What are some of these perhaps radical proposals for shifting our priorities?
The source proposes that we need more than just tinkering around the edges. It calls for a truly radical shift in priorities and a fundamental reorganization of our world from the ground up, as it says. It outlines several potential blueprints, conceptual frameworks, really, that move beyond superficial fixes towards systemic change. One blueprint mentioned is rethinking global governance, advocating for something like a reorganized UN. The core idea here is that international governance structures, like the United Nations, should be rebuilt, fundamentally reimagined to represent people and their needs more directly, not just powerful nation-states and their often narrow geopolitical or economic interests. Imagine for a moment a United Nations where critical decisions on global health pandemics, climate change action, or upholding universal human rights weren't constantly dictated or blocked by the veto power of just a few powerful nations pursuing their own agendas, but instead were influenced by a more direct representation of the global populace, perhaps through regional assemblies or other mechanisms, giving a genuine voice to those currently unheard or marginalized on the international stage.
That would be a huge shift from the current nation-state model that has dominated international relations for centuries, a truly fundamental change. And what about the economy? How would that be reorganized for a more just future according to these blueprints?
Well, it calls for just economics, which is explored through the idea of rethinking trade and economic structures more broadly. This imagines designing and building an economy that genuinely serves the many, not just the privileged few, moving decisively beyond purely profit-driven models that have arguably often led to environmental degradation, worker exploitation, and extreme wealth disparities. It would involve designing trade systems and domestic economic policies that prioritize fair wages and worker rights, ensure equitable access to essential resources like clean water and energy, support local economic resilience and sustainable practices, and actively build shared prosperity rather than just allowing wealth to concentrate at the very top. The goal is to create a system where wealth and opportunity are much more equitably distributed, addressing the root causes of economic disenfranchisement and instability, both within and between nations.
And perhaps the most radical proposal mentioned, at least in terms of scale, is the one titled a 2T cut. What does that entail, and what kind of impact could redirecting those resources possibly have?
A 2T cut refers to a truly radical restructuring of global budget priorities. It proposes diverting a massive amount of global military spending, an estimated $2 trillion annually, which is roughly the total global defense budget combined, and redirecting those vast resources towards meeting critical human needs and ensuring planetary well-being instead. Just try to imagine the transformative impact of such a reallocation. That $2 trillion year after year could be used to provide universal access to quality health care globally, potentially eradicating many preventable diseases. It could fund universal education for all children around the world, unlocking immense human potential. Or it could dramatically accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources on a massive scale, helping us combat the climate crisis effectively. It's presented as a fundamental call to reallocate global capital away from instruments of conflict and defense towards investments in human development, environmental sustainability, and global cooperation. It emphasizes that our collective survival and flourishing likely hinge on shifting our priorities dramatically, from conflict and national security defined narrowly to human security and planetary health defined broadly.
And the source is very clear on this point. These are not utopias. They're not presented as unrealistic, pie-in-the-sky dreams. They are framed as urgent blueprints for survival in a world facing profound interconnected challenges, climate change, pandemics, inequality that require fundamental systemic change, not just incremental adjustments or technological fixes alone.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've been on, from dissecting the specifics of BlackRock and Aladdin in the housing market to exploring the data on the real causes of the crisis, and then expanding out to these deeper implications of power, technology, empathy, and these challenging blueprints for the future. So if we take all of this in the nuanced reality of BlackRock, the systemic nature of the housing crisis, the critique of billionaire instincts, and these calls for radical reorganization, what's the ultimate takeaway for us as informed listeners trying to make sense of it all?
I think the core conclusion, the thread that really resonates deeply through all our source material today is this. Perhaps the true measure of a civilization, or maybe just of our shared humanity, is not how efficiently you can deport someone, or how technologically advanced your tools are, or how far you can flee the planet when things get tough. It is instead, perhaps, how deeply and genuinely you care for those who have no vote, no money, no platform, no microphone. The truly voiceless and vulnerable among us. While powerful entities and billionaires may often act on instincts driven by leverage, efficiency, self-preservation, or profit maximization, humanity, collectively, must consciously cultivate something different. Call it a collective conscience. This conscience needs to consistently prioritize fundamental human well-being, dignity, and systemic equity over mere technological prowess or financial efficiency gains that benefit only a few. Ultimately, it's about demanding that power, whether it's financial, technological, or political, serves the many, serves the common good, not just the interests of the few who wield it.
That's a really powerful thought to leave you with, our listeners. This deep dive has certainly shown us that the narrative around BlackRock and the housing crisis is far more nuanced and complex than those sensational headlines or viral social media posts would suggest. Aladdin is indeed a powerful software, a pivotal tool in global finance, absolutely. But it is not a property owner itself. And BlackRock's direct role in the single-family housing market is indirect and minimal compared to other factors. The true drivers of the housing crisis are far more systemic. Decades of supply shortages, overwhelming demographic demand pressures, regulatory hurdles, and the profound impact of interest rates on affordability. But beyond just those numbers and market mechanics, we've explored how powerful entities sometimes choose to target the disenfranchised, highlighting a critical and profound need for empathy, critical thinking, and perhaps a fundamental reevaluation in how we understand power and shape our shared future. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes unsettling intersection of finance, technology, and society. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep exploring.